if anyone else is listening, then Phil's another member of our hello. Our parish council has now proudly got a climate and environment working group, and Phil is one of the 4 members, and I think Nick Green, who you can't see, but he's another member. So now we were doing stuff already, but now it's official sort of thing, which is great. And if Ros or I get run over by a bus, then there'll be other people to carry on the task. Yeah. In other news, we've been successful in a grant application for there's a Gardening for Wildlife book, so that's going to be published and distributed free in local parishes. So that's going to be happening in the pipeline, and it looks like we'll be trying to get hold of a thermal imaging camera and getting some training for a few of us to use that camera, and then it can be loaned out to people in the area. So hopefully we should have access to that. We felt it would be really nice to visually be able to see where we're losing heat rather than just having to talk about it, you know. I like to say the best form of heating is no heating at all, in that if you can gain it from the sun or just yourself or your cookers, you know, that's brilliant. So look, we've got Graham here, who's a down to earth heat pump expert who really does know his stuff. And I was saying at the beginning of the call, I'm really grateful that he's been able to provide some time to us in his evening, to just lend us, you know, there's a lot of misinformation around heat pumps, and it's a big part of the future of our heating. You know, a lot of us are going to be having to go on to heat pumps to heat our homes. So if we can clear out some of the misinformation and get some clarity, I think that's a big benefit. Johnny, I can see Johnny on my screen there, who has a heat pump heating his house, and Nick, who we can't see, is about to put a heat pump into his new house, and I've just put a heat pump into my house, but I don't count because we've got a straw bale house, so it's weird. Anyway, Graham, I think I should be quiet now and hand over to you. I'll make you host as well.
Thank you very much. So evening, everybody. First thing I'd like to say is that I'm not here to sell you anything. So I for the last 13 years have run essentially a wholesaler of heat pumps, selling heat pumps to the guy or lady who comes around and installs the unit in your house. So I'm kind of a technical support engineer, but in the last year or so, I have sort of taken a bit of a back seat from the selling. And now I like to say that I'm a heat pump enthusiast. So basically I do stuff like this and promote heat pumps in general, but please don't ring me up and buy anything off me. I haven't got anything to sell. So there we go. So I thought I'd just start, and I don't want to bore you to death with loads and loads of PowerPoint, but I just want to show you a couple of little slides of some really basic information that I like to get out to everyone. I'm sure you all know this, but I'm going to quickly do this. I'm going to try and share my screen, which I can do somewhere. Just talk amongst yourselves. So there we go. I'm going to share my screen. I want to do the entire screen, I think. Oh, let me try this then. Right, so you should be able to see a picture of an ancient house. Can you all see that?
No.
No? No?
No.
Okay. Let me start again. Stop sharing. Just bear with me. I will share again. Sorry, there's share screen, entire screen. Yes. Share. Can you see my house now?
Ah, yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I thought we would start with this. So I thought I would entitle this "Heat Pumps Won't Heat Old Houses." So this is the house I'm currently sat in, 1922, built by an idiot. very charming, but it has absolutely no insulation anywhere, because they didn't feel that was necessary. There are fireplaces in all of the rooms, and they even decided to ventilate the floor between the upstairs and downstairs just to make sure that the wood lice had plenty of oxygen. So thermally a disaster, but I think it's quite quirky. So we bought the place. So I just want to talk about a few bits and pieces. So most of you, I'm guessing, have got some kind of oil or gas or whatever, LPG boilers. And it shouldn't be a big surprise to you that you've got this funny white box, usually white box, stuck in a cupboard in the kitchen or stuck outside the house. And inside it, we're going to burn some stuff. And your boiler is essentially like kind of imagine a gas hob with a saucepan of water on it. What we do is we use the flame to heat the water and then pump it around the house and emit the heat through radiators. So most people know this. The beauty of this type of system is it's easy to understand. Flames heat stuff and that heats the house. So that's kind of nice and easy. Well, a heat pump is essentially a box which is going to replace your oil or gas boiler. So the theory is that we are going to put this new greener boiler. I know everyone says it's beige, but it's greener in the sense that about 2/3 of the energy it supplies is renewable, which is a long way better than burning fossil fuels in your house. And this particular machine here, you can see parked outside the house. It's nice and simple. I like to say to people, a heat pump is just a boiler that lives in the garden. The 2 tubes that used to connect to your boiler are going to be pushed out the wall by your plumber and connected onto the back of the unit here. And this is going to basically just replace what your boiler does. So there's nothing particularly elaborate. It is just a new, greener source of heat. So most of you have probably got a system which looks something like this in your house. So you have some kind of boiler on the wall or on the floor connected to a couple of valves, and there'll be a pump inside, and there'll be some kind of hot water cylinder, maybe in the loft or maybe in a utility room, and a bunch of radiators connected around the house. And if your boiler was oil or gas or LPG, it would essentially look something like this. And we in the trade like to call this a system boiler. All that means is you have a boiler and a hot water cylinder. So in essence, what my industry does for a living is takes the boiler and does this and sticks a heat pump on. That's it. We take the boiler off and we replace it by one of these. So if only it was that simple, it would be cheap and easy and nice and simple to do. It would take about half an hour to do and would be very, very cheap. But unfortunately, heat pumps are unnecessarily complicated. So what really happens is it ends up looking like this. And you can see, I'm not going to go through all this now because it's incredibly dull. But you can see that there are lots and lots of components and ancillaries and bits and pieces in the system. All of this gubbins, which currently doesn't exist, is now going to be put into your house somewhere. And if I'm honest, the reason most of this stuff exists is that we in heat pump land haven't worked out yet how to put all of this gubbins in this box. But when we do, life will be much, much simpler. So the change from a fossil fuel to a heat pump is not just swapping one for another. There's a fair bit of plumbing as well, and wiring and a few other bits and pieces. The big question we always get is heat pumps. It's a big box. It's got a fan on the front. Is it going to be noisy? I always say to people, the decibels mean nothing to anybody. I don't know how many decibels the room I'm currently sitting at is. But when you look in the books, they tell you it's 60 decibels. It's very, very difficult to establish what that sounds like. So I have this really insane idea that you could try if you had nothing better to do over Christmas, which is take your microwave oven and a desk fan, take them outside and put them in the garden where you think your heat pump would go, and turn both of them on at once. And that's the noise a heat pump's going to make. So you get the mechanical whir of the microwave and you get your fan noise from your desk fan. And that is very much the sort of representation of the noise they make. It sounds like a pretty crazy idea, but it actually gives a really good idea of what these machines are going to sound like. The thing to really bear in mind when we're talking about noise also is, your heat pump, if it's designed correctly, will be on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that noise is going to be there pretty much all the time. So it is one of the major factors that we think about when we're designing these things. So I talked about my house, 1920s, it's only 110 square meters. I understand that where you are, your houses might be a bit bigger and might be even worse insulated than mine. So I thought we'd look at a couple of things about what we had to do in our house to get a heat pump in. So the first thing is that we had to put a brand new hot water cylinder in. So every heat pump installation will have a hot water cylinder. There's no such thing as an instant heat pump. You can't make water instantly, so you're going to need a cylinder somewhere. And normally the radiators are going to need some work, because currently if you run an oil boiler, your radiators will be very, very hot to the touch. To give you an idea, 70 degrees C is where they sort of normally run them. That's the sort of temperature you can hold the radiator maybe for about 10 seconds. So you can get hold of it, grip it tightly for about 10 seconds, and then it starts to be painful. Why they're that hot is historic, but that's something which is very, very difficult to achieve with a heat pump. I want to try and run your radiator to something like 50 degrees C, which is the temperature you could lean against for quite a long period of time, a couple of minutes, without causing you any problems. But the disadvantage with dropping your radiator temperature is you get less heat out of them. So we either need to make the radiator bigger, or we need to insulate the house a little bit so it can cope with the lower temperatures. So this is something which I'm just going to throw in quickly, which is weird in our industry. We're in a very interesting time at the moment. Everything's changing, and this is because heat pumps are beginning to arrive now, which are able to run at the same temperature your boiler did. So if we can run a heat pump at the same temperature as your boiler, essentially we can swap one with the other without replumbing the house, without changing the radiators, without changing the cylinder, and so on. And this is something which people are looking at quite a bit, coming into the new grants, which are coming in spring, in April time. These have ultra high temperature units. They're not quite as efficient as a standard unit, but it's very, very simple to install. And I think this is the sort of thing that in the next 12 months is really going to take our industry by storm, because it's easy to do. So now we come to questions. So I'm going to stop sharing and escape that and hopefully return back to the screen. I'm not sure if you all kind of knew that stuff or any of that was new, but if anyone does have any sort of questions or anything that they think is a major problem with heat pumps, I'd be very, very happy to hear. Paul, oh, sorry. Paul?
Yeah, Graham, yeah, thanks for that. That's very interesting. The picture you showed there, how big was that? That looks like your back door. Your unit looks like it's about, what, just over a meter, 1.2 meters high by what?
Yes, I mean, I actually sadly have lots of photos of me stood by heat pumps, which I could show you. But essentially, I'm 5'9", and a system which would do about 150 meter square house as old as mine would be about as tall as I am, so about 1.5, 1.6 meters high for a heat pump of that size. But again, one of the things that's changing in our industry, we used to have what we call tombstone units, so quite tall, thin units with 2 fans. It's now becoming trendy to make them short and fat. So short and fat is the new tall and thin. So if you bought a unit today, it's much more likely to be more like waist height, but it's sort of fatter and wider than its predecessor.
Okay. And what's the sort of clearance that you need to leave all around these units then?
So you want about 300 mil, or about a foot round the back and sides, but at the front you need about 1.2, 1.3 meters more is better. What you've got to bear in mind with these things is that their waste product is vast quantities of very cold air. So we're going to draw the air through the unit, and then we want to throw that away. and we don't want it to come round again. So you don't want to put the unit blowing directly at a fence only a foot away, or the air bounces off. So sort of metre and a half off the front is where we would like to achieve.
Okay, and I mean, one of the places that I've seen, a lot of the new houses that are being built, and they're being built with gas boilers, and the government is talking about stopping selling gas boilers for replacement at some point in the future going forward. But these houses, they've all got quite small gardens. They're only about 5 meters long, something like that, by about 3 meters wide, 3 or 4 meters wide. And they've all got wooden paneling fencing all the way around. So there's not very much airflow into those gardens, especially on cold winter nights when the air is very still, and the cold air kind of pools inside those wooden panelled fences. I mean, how would that affect the performance, do you think?
Bizarrely, not a lot. Not much difference at all. If you put it in a tiny box, the size of a garage, it would make a terrible problem. But
well, that's what the size of these gardens are now with the new. You've seen what they do with new houses. There's virtually no garden at all.
The thing is, because you have no lid on it, you will get the air moving around. It really won't be a problem. I mean, I suppose it is a slightly different way of looking at it. But if you went out there and put a couple of bar fires in that garage, in that garden, it wouldn't be warm. And that's the kind of energy that we're going to be pulling out of the garden. So I don't think, I've never experienced a problem where the back garden is significantly colder than the surrounding area, unless it's tiny.
Okay.
So as something I actually missed off, I was going to do a little slide that said kind of where do heat pumps work best? And you often hear people say, new build's really easy for heat pump, but of course it is. Anything's easy in new build because you're starting with nothing. So yeah, it's like saying LED lighting's best in new build. Well, yes, because you're sticking it in. But one of the things that I would always give you a bit of an idea about is you can only buy a heat pump so big. There's only so large a system that you can buy for a domestic property. And to give you an idea how big that is, if you're running oil, if you use more than about 2,500 litres of oil a year, you would need more than one heat pump. It's a very, very rough rule of thumb. So if you're burning more than 2,500 litres of oil, you could possibly be in a situation where you would have more than one heat pump outside your house. And if you had more than one heat pump, you always need planning permission. So as an industry, if you said to me, do you like doing installations in houses which use 3,000 litres of oil a year, I would say not really. It's really hard work. I'd rather work in the bit that's simpler. Does that make sense?
You're talking here about heat pumps rather than ground source heat pumps, are you?
Yes. So my speciality is air source. I'm familiar with ground source. Ground source comes into its own when you go to bigger properties. So the problem with ground source is there's a kind of cost that you have just to start, which prohibits their use in smaller properties. But something, again, very, very rough rule of thumb, this. If you want to use a horizontal ground source, so you want a ground source where the pipework is buried under the garden in a horizontal array, they have to dig up the garden, and it's about sort of shoulder height, 1.5 meters deep. They bury it's not just under the soil, it's about 1.5 meters deep. And really, really rough rule of thumb, you need a garden which is about 5 times the size of your house.
Right.
I mean, I'm just throwing sort of simple numbers out. It is possible to bore into the ground using boreholes, but it's very, very expensive to do. So we try to go horizontal first, and then if you haven't got any space, you can go into boreholes. But to give you an idea, in a 200 meter square house, which is, I I don't know, 120 years old, with going into the ground, you could easily be spending 30,000-40,000 pounds on a ground source. So they tend to be very specialist jobs for that reason.
Yeah, and would I mean, my house is about 2,500 square feet. So that can that still be powered by a heat pump? I mean, we're getting near to two then, are we?
Yes, I mean 2,500 square feet or 250 meters squared. And how old is it?
It was built in 1938.
Okay, so not too bad. So you got cavity walls and so
Cavity
on.
walls that have been filled.
Yeah.
And proper loft insulation, but not very good insulation in the floor. It's a suspended floor and it gets a lot of draft. We live right by the sea, so it's very windy.
Yeah, that the vented floors are hilarious. I have them. They're an absolute disaster thermally, but when you're young, you polish the floors in the first summer, and then you buy carpets as soon as it gets cold. We've all done it.
Well, we can see the carpets lifting sometimes.
Yes, that sounds familiar. So you would, at 250 meters squared in a house that you'd be right at the top end of one. You're really on the cusp. So what we used to do with houses like yours is we'd say you can either have 2 units, or what we can do is kind of do a hybrid where we use a little bit of your oil boiler and help get the heat pump and the oil boiler to run together. But in April, the government are stopping that. They don't like that. I don't know why they don't like that. But right now, if you put one in, you would get paid a grant. If you wait till April and you want to keep your boiler, you won't get a grant at all. I'm sure you've all heard Boris telling everyone about the new grant. Those of us in the know, I've got some really bad news for you. So most of you have got quite large houses by the sound of things. So if you put a heat pump in today, your grant would be something of the order of £1,500 a year for 7 years. So about 11,000 quid. In April, it's going to be a flat £5,000. So the new grant they're talking about is much smaller than the existing, which is why, if I'm honest, our industry is flat out trying desperately to catch all of you guys and get you on now, because you're going to be much less keen to jump into this technology in April. And there is a political reason for this. When the grant started originally, it was limitless. So it was done very, very large houses. Then they changed it and capped it. So it was designed to capture you guys. And you guys, kind of the theory is, you go, well, you've had 7 years to get in, where were you? Now we're moving it down to cheaper housing, better insulated housing, and so on. So yeah, I'm not trying to push you to get in there now, but it's well worth looking. And actually, I have a little calculator where you can put your details in, and it will tell you what the grant will be today, what the grant will be in the future. You're very welcome. If you go to my website, you can download it. You don't have to put all your email and everything in. You just download a little Excel and put your data in, and it gives you the data.
And Graham, these new high performance heat pumps, which are coming in, you think, next year?
Yeah.
Is that going to be sort of more cost effective if you don't have to change your radiators? And
yeah, I mean, I'll give you some really, really rough numbers, top of the head stuff. So if your house, we'll take your house as an example. If we just, or an installer turned up and just put a new cylinder, a new heat pump, tubed it up into essentially what you've got now, they'd charge you, depending on who they are, between 10 and 12,000 quid. If you need a radiator changed, allow about £250 a radiator. It's a really good rough guide. So in a 250 square meter house, you're probably looking at 10 to 12 radiators maybe across the house. Doesn't matter how big they are, just assume the same price for everything. So changing the rads in your house is potentially going to cost another 3,000-4,000 quid. So if and this is kind of revolutionary thinking in our industry, if I said to you, but I have a machine now that we can plonk on and you don't change the radiators, but it's going to cost you a couple of £100 a year more to run, it's a very different payback calculation. So it's always best to try and go for lower temperature, but often the jobs die at the stage where people say, oh, I need 15 radiators changed, and that's going to cost me a fortune.
Yeah. And the other thing is all the disruption of taking up floors and.
But so you tend to find, again, when I was saying where the heat pumps work best, if you decided for some bizarre reason tomorrow to totally renovate your house and replaster everything and rip it to bits and rewire it, really easy to put a heat pump in then, because you're ripping the house apart.
Yeah.
So yes, the disruption is often the point where people say this may not be for me, and these higher temperature machines, that takes that away.
And how much more expensive are they than the current ones I'd like to do?
The horrid thing is that heat pumps are all overpriced, unfortunately. We're famous for charging lots of money for them, and the high temperature machines are coming in from China, so they're actually cheaper.
Oh.
For the minute, until the Chinese work out they can rip off everybody else, like we all do. Obviously, everyone except me.
So in a house of my size, you're saying with a high temperature heat pump, you'd still need two.
You're right on the cusp. We'd have to. So if you use my little calculator, it will kind of be a bit woolly, but from that point on, what you can do is you then get a proper survey done by an installer and so on. But the idea, so the way I look at our industry is it's really good idea for me to be able to very quickly throw you some quick numbers. This is the sort of money saving and so on. And because for some people it doesn't work, whereas other people go, this is amazing for me, this is what I want to do. And all my calculator is designed to do is to work out, does it work or does it not work? And then when you ring your installer, you can say, I've already had a quick look. I know roughly where I'm going to be. I know how much money I'm going to save. And all they do is tighten that maths up. But unfortunately, you are right on the cusp of that. I think you'll probably err towards the 2 units.
Right.
And the problem with 2 units, you're looking at 20,000 quid.
Right.
So
and 5,000 grant towards that.
Yeah, that's all in April.
Yeah.
I can't dress it up, I'm afraid. It is what it is.
How long do Graham? How long do the units last on average before the heat pump needs to be replaced?
It's the $1 million question. I have units out there which are 13 years old. I have units out there that failed, in 13 months, depending on how they were abused and used and so on. I think, as a rule, it's a bit like, how long does a car last? Usually you'd say 10, 11 years. I have motorbikes which were built before the war, but I'm sure they weren't designed to last that long. So I think 10 to 12 years is a reasonable expectation. Bit like a boiler.
Okay. So at the end of the, how long does the government grant pay you for?
So right now, you get 7 years.
Okay.
In April, it will pay once.
Okay. And if you needed to replace the boiler, the heat pump, in 10 years' time or 11 years' time, would you get a grant for that, do you think? Or is it per installation?
My crystal ball is a little murky. You are only supposed to get the grant once. So, and they have said in the new grants, they've just released some of the data. So it's very, very new for us. They've said that if you have a heat pump and you're replacing it with another heat pump, you don't get any grant at all because it is a boiler replacement scheme. I don't think, to be honest, I don't think there will be a grant in 3 years' time. I think they'll get rid of the grant. Because if you think about what happened in solar panels, if you bought solar panels 20 years ago, you used to get an enormous tariff, and then it slowly fell away, and now there isn't one. And mysteriously, solar panels are considerably cheaper than they were about 10 years ago. So I think we'll see the same with heat pumps. The cost will fall.
How do you think heat pumps? Sorry, how do you think heat pumps compare with solar hot water panels in terms of providing hot water?
Solar thermal hot water or solar PV into a thing called an iBoost, so using PV off the roof. Both are amazing. Yeah, once they're in, they're basically cost free to run. They're not particularly effective at night in November. And so that's the problem. So we see a lot of people integrating those two technologies. So in the spring, summer, and autumn, essentially your hot water is provided completely off the roof by your PV or your solar thermal, and then the heat pump comes in, yeah, with the heating season and takes over the hot water at the same time. So I'm a single technology guy. So I have just a heat pump in my house, nothing else. And it provides all of my hot water. I have no immersion heater. You're supposed to have one. I don't. I chose not to. Yeah, all our hot water, all our heating is done by a heat pump. I'm a big believer in trying on myself before trying on you.
Graham, would you mind going back to your the slide that you showed that what the realistic heat pump diagram, and just explain the different components of that diagram?
It's not a problem. I will try not to bore you too much. It's my kind of pet project. So can you see that?
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay, so essentially this bit here is your new boiler.
Yep.
So this is your heat pump. It doesn't have to be a Samsung. Other brands are available. So essentially they because it's outside and you might want to move it a little bit, it comes on slightly flexible hoses to begin with. So that they're just like flexi tubes. Once you come into the house, you have a pump which normally would be in your boiler. This would be inside your boiler. So we, for some reason, we don't put it inside the unit. So it's loose. We have a couple of valves. So these open to allow water up into our hot water cylinder or up into our heating circuit. Now,
and what size of a tank is that?
So you can have any size you like, but to give you a very rough idea, what we do, so our industry is policed by a bunch of people called the MCS. They're the gatekeepers to the grant, and they tell us how to size the cylinder. So what we do is we take the number of bedrooms plus one, that's how many people live in the house, and we allow 55 litres per person. So usually 2 or 3 or 400 litre cylinder. To give you an idea, a 300 litre cylinder is the same height as me, so 5'9", and it's 2 foot across. But they are available in different shapes and sizes and so on, and you can push the installer towards a different size if you want.
Right.
Once you come out in here, we have a second pump. I don't want to get into the hydraulics, but we have a second pump and obviously a bunch of radiators or underfloor heating. Actually, I went to one the other day, which was an old gas air heating system, and we converted that into a heat pump. Coming back, we have some filters and some devices which measure the speed of the water, because we want to give you performance figures. So we measure the speed of the water and the temperature so we can tell you what's going on. So there's nothing in there which is alien to a plumber. It's just alien the fact that somebody didn't put it all in this box.
And is the H a thermal switch or what?
Well, these two here,
yes.
These are just mechanical valves. They're electrically driven. You will probably have them in your house already. You might, a lot of people have these two combined, so they have what it's like a T shape. So it's called a 3-port valve, but we prefer 2 2-ports. It's just a quirk of the system. But essentially, you can only do heating or hot water. So one opens, one closes, and vice versa.
And the header buffer.
Essentially, I don't want to get too bogged down in it, but essentially the speed of the water through the heat pump is very, very fast indeed, like twice the speed of your boiler. So the water's roaring around here very, very quickly. But if we roar the water around your radiators, it makes them noisy. So basically what this thing does is it changes the speed of the water from one side to the other. So you can adjust the speed here to be whatever speed you like. However, I need this to move very, very quickly.
Right. And the final question is, I'm surprised you haven't mentioned underfloor heating, which I put in anticipation, although I had a gas boiler at the time, in anticipation of a heat pump later on. Underfloor heating should be more efficient to transfer the heat to the rooms.
So underfloor heating is wonderful if you have it. Obviously, it can be very difficult to retrofit if you're not doing quite a lot of work in the house. But something I didn't really sort of go into in massive detail is the biggest challenge you have with a heat pump is I would like you to run it as cold as humanly possible. The colder you run the water, the higher the efficiency. So I always say to people, the temperature is basically the same as miles per hour. So if you go slower, it's cheaper. So underfloor heating runs at 35 or 40 degrees, so it's inherently very efficient. But if you want your radiators running at 40 or 50 or 60 or 70, you have to pay for that temperature. So underfloor heating is wonderful, but there are many, many applications where putting underfloor heating in is very difficult to do. So bearing in mind, people don't want us to change the rads, let alone put underfloor heating.
Yes, but if you say you're redoing the house and you're putting a new flooring in and so on, that would be the ideal time to put in underfloor heating. If you're already doing something else where you've ripped it up, what I'm challenging you on is, would that be a cost-effective thing to do, to put in underfloor if you have the opportunity?
Yes, so very, very rough guide. Again, I'm throwing these sort of rough guides out. Underfloor heating, you should allow about £35 per meter squared to install. So to supply and install, that's the sort of cost. So it is considerably more expensive than radiators, obviously, because it's more work. But then when you throw that into the cost of replastering, redecorating, and so on, it might be something you'd want to consider. Yeah, I'm not here to tell you how to spend your money. As far as will you ever get your money back? No. I've just done some analysis. It's very easy to do the analysis because the maths that we have to use is governed by MCS, who govern the grant. So I could do a calculation on your house running at 35, 40, 45, 50 degrees and give you all of the figures. I'm obliged to do that. You don't save 2 or 3 times the money, you save 20%.
Right.
Top of the head figure. So it is more efficient, but it's not half the cost.
Right.
But you're right, the comfort's nice.
Yes.
Ask
Graham, can I just butt in? You mentioned that heat pumps may not last very long. I've got a 15-year-old heat pump. I have a ground source system with going straight down to the ground.
Yep.
It's 15 years old as a Kenza heat pump. It seems to be still going pretty strong, touch wood. I can't see any reason why it won't carry on for a long time. But I just wonder whether there's more efficient ones around these days. Are the modern ones more efficient? Do you have any feel for that? Or
I would love to say yes, they're much better, and you should instantly remove yours and you'll save a fortune. But depressingly, there hasn't been enormous strides in efficiency. I often joke that in my office I have the world's oldest Samsung heat pump. It's 13 years old and it looks exactly the same as the 2022 model. The difference in efficiency may be 5 or 6%. So if it's working, leave it in, and we'll get you next time. So Caroline's been desperate to jump in for a while. So can I take a question from you, Caroline?
Thank you. Yeah, we had a heat pump installed about a year ago, and we're all keeping lovely and warm. It's all running well. But I know it contains a refrigerant, which is a greenhouse gas. And my question is, will that refrigerant be damaging the atmosphere? And when the heat pump is next serviced, can I ask for a refrigerant that isn't a greenhouse gas, or some measures that will make sure we protect the environment?
Okay, no, really good question. So what is your unit? Do you know who made it?
It's an LG.
LG, yeah, okay. So your unit's running on a refrigerant we call R32. Which is the stuff that is, so If you'd bought your unit 5 years ago, it would have had a refrigerant called R410A in. Then they moved to R32. And the move was made because of the global warming potential. So we all know that 1 kilo of CO2 dumped in the atmosphere, it has a global warming potential of 1. R410A, this is top of the head stuff. R410A is something like 3,000 times as bad. So 1 kilo of R410A is equivalent to the CO2 of a third of a British person for a year. And that's how much refrigerant's in your unit. So when we move to 32, it's a bit better. It's something like 500 kilos of CO2. I'd have to check the figures exactly, but if you type GWP of R32 in Google, it gives you the figures. So yeah, it's still not perfect. You cannot change the refrigerant from one to the other. It's a bit like saying, can I change my diesel car to a petrol just by sloshing new fuel? Doesn't work. There is a problem though. As you move to lower global warming potential, the refrigerants become more and more flammable. So the new super refrigerant, the one that I showed my last slide, is a refrigerant we call R290, and you call it propane. It's the stuff you use on your barbecue. It turns out it's an amazing refrigerant. It burns like hell if it leaks, but it doesn't matter because it's in the garden. It's as safe as having a gas bottle in your back garden. But the global warming potential, I think, is about 5, so it's tiny. So if it leaks, it causes a very, very small amount of damage compared to the old refrigerants. When I was a nipper back in the 90s, we used to use a wonder gas called R12, which not only destroyed the ozone layer and caused all that problem, but it had a global warming potential, I think, of about 5,000, maybe a bit higher. It was awful stuff. Great refrigerant, but it wasn't great for the environment, which is why it's no longer with us. So, but something to bear in mind, your machine, nobody should ever touch the refrigerant. It is exactly the same technology as your domestic fridge. So here's the question. When did somebody last touch the refrigerant on your domestic fridge?
Only when it's scrapped, I guess.
Exactly. And that's the point. So your guy or lady who's servicing the machine should never touch the refrigerant at all. It's in there. It stays in there. It's used again, again, and again. And when it's scrapped, I have a ticket. It's called an F-gas ticket. If I let that refrigerant go into the atmosphere, then I face an enormous fine. They tear up my ticket and so on. So the days of us letting refrigerants into the atmosphere are long, long gone. So I've got Tom has got his hand up too. Tom, can I take a question from you? You're on mute.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. Yeah, you mentioned immersion heater.
Yeah.
Now I've had an air source heater for 9 years now.
Mm-hmm.
I was told I needed the immersion heater to avoid problems with Legionnaire's disease. Now, was that a load of rubbish?
No, it's not rubbish. It's basically, we as an industry are afraid of prison food. So if I was to advise you that you don't need to do Legionella protection, so all Legionella protection means is that once a week we heat the cylinder to 60 degrees C. If I was to advise you don't need to do that, and then you got Legionella, I end up going to prison, which is something I don't want to do. So I, in my house, chose not to use the immersion because I can make that decision. But it's a very, very grey area in domestic. In commercial hospitals and so on, Legionella is very clear what you have to do. In domestic, there is no rule. So we follow the commercial model and everyone gently panics. So my advice would be, it only costs you £1 or £2 a week to do. Just do it, be safe. But I'm incredibly tight and I'm obsessed with saving money with energy. So I don't do it. But please don't take my advice on that.
Well, I'm nearly as tight. Just one thing to chuck in to the mix. I've been pleased as punch with it as a heating system and the cost of running it, because I reckon it costs about the same as gas.
Mm-hmm.
I reckon that before I got it, and I'm happy to say that it's worked. But We've got mechanical ventilation and heat recovery, and I know that's not easy to install retrofit either, but I'd just say that it is, once you've got rid of all the drafts, and we were lucky having a new house, that really is the icing on the cake as far as we're concerned.
I couldn't agree more. So to put it, so obviously in new houses, MVHR, mechanical ventilation is amazing. Those of us who live in drafty old houses like mine, it's a total waste of time, because the ventilation is the problem. To give you an idea, in my house, over half my heat loss is drafts.
Yeah.
So the dream would be to seal my house outside. I needed MVHR, but that is the only way that's going to happen is if a bulldozer turns up in the back garden fairly soon. There's just no, obviously you can do it, but very difficult.
Yeah, no, we were very lucky having the opportunity of, having a new house. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, it basically saves about in a new house about a third easily of your heat loss. It should be used in every new house, but it isn't, which is a shame. So,
thank you.
John Matthews has got his hand up.
Thank you. Just a quick one, Graham, I think, although I don't know whether the answer is simple or quick, but just thinking about air source as part of a kind of hybrid domestic heating system, for want of a better word. We have a drafty old house, probably 16th or 17th century, with an oil boiler on it and a planning fairly substantial works to the property. Given the age of the oil boiler and our eagerness to get off oil, it seems not ideal moment to switch over. But particularly in light of some of the complicating factors you've spoken about in terms of draftiness and size of property and what have you, I'm wondering to what extent it ever works to heat part of your house with an air source heat pump, and to use a different solution, for example, say an electric boiler or something for another part.
So that isn't generally how it's done. So, but you could do that, kind of go, let's do upstairs on one system with a heat pump and downstairs with something else. It could be done that way. It tends not to be. I don't know why, actually. I've never thought, and I've never been asked that. That's a new question, which is great. What they tend to do is, because if you think about your house, there's pipework already in all over the house, all in one big system.
Yeah.
So what we tend to do with a hybridized system is you would essentially tee a heat pump into what you've already got. So bring two pipes out the back of the boiler, tee your heat pump, and off you go. Now, the genius of the systems, and all of them do this, despite what they tell in the marketing, what happens is we set them up so that the heat pump will work as much as it can. But when it's struggling and it's going, like, I am flat out, it's cold outside, I've got nowhere else to go, it then can bring in its little mate, its oil boiler and so on. So there's all sorts of different configurations of how it's done and so on. But that is quite a trendy thing, if you will, sort of backup system. The only thing I would say about direct electric heating is very cheap to buy, but horribly expensive to run.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, yeah, if you think about it, a kilowatt hour of electricity at the moment, I'm paying 21p per kilowatt hour. Mm-hmm. If you're buying your oil at 60p a litre, I don't know if 60p a litre is a good price, but a kilowatt hour, a litre of oil has 10 kilowatt hours of heat in it. Mm. So you're paying a lot less, and that's the problem, is that obviously normal mains gas is the cheapest form of energy. Oil and LPG are then kind of next. Electricity is always the most expensive. The reason that we can get the cost down with a heat pump is that we gather the free or some free energy out of the gardens and bring the cost back down. But I think somebody mentioned earlier, it would be completely realistic about 6 months ago to say that a gas boiler and a heat pump are about the same cost. Right now, because we're getting hammered for electricity, my heat pump, hands up, my heat pump is more expensive than the gas boiler. Hopefully that will sort itself out fairly soon. One of the things that we did a comparison a few years ago, I'd have to do it again, but we worked out what the oil price equivalent of a heat pump is. And when it was 15p a kilowatt hour, we used to say that heat pump cost the same as oil at 30p a litre. So if you're buying your oil at more than 30p a litre, that isn't true anymore. It's more like probably 40, 45p a litre. But it's really simple measure. You can say, well, the tanker's just delivered oil. I paid 60p a litre. I can expect to save X amount. And when oil is 60 or 70p a litre, we're popping champagne here in heat pump land because it's really, really easy to sell. When it drops to 30 or 40p a litre, our time is tough.
I see. That's really helpful. Thank you very much, Graham.
No worries. Any more questions? Any more for any more?
Graham, sorry. On your website, you said you can do calculations of payback, we like to call it. Does it include comparison of ground source with air?
Yeah. So that basically,
where can we get the? Sorry, and where can we get the web? What's the website address?
So it's just www.abcheatpumps.co.uk. It's a tiny website. There's very little on it because essentially I don't advertise doing anything. I work for 3 or 4 manufacturers across and installers, so I'm never looking for more stuff. But if you go on there, I can't remember where it is. I think if you scroll down, you can download. It's just a little Excel. There's 4 calculators, so you can put in the size of your house, your run cost of your house, your EPC if you have one, and once you've worked out how many kilowatts it is, you can then put that in the ground source one at the bottom.
Right. Okay.
But bear in mind, it's really rule of thumb, very rough. It's just, we use it at exhibitions. When people say, how much is it going to cost me? You go, bash, bash, bash. There we go. Off you go with some numbers. It works really well.
And just another, sorry, is this new high temperature pump, heat pump that's coming in, how proven is that technology, or is it because it's very new? I don't know. I suppose it isn't. But
so bear in mind, the technology hasn't changed at all for as long as can be. The only difference is the refrigerant. If anybody has purchased a new freezer or fridge in the last 10 years, that's running on R290, same refrigerant. So it is very well proven. They use it in every fridge. The amount of refrigerant is tiny, but you have a machine sat in your kitchen which is running on R290. They don't call it propane for a good reason.
So the new high temperature, you said 70-degree ones, they're 70 degrees because they run on a
new
different refrigerant.
So it's done. And yeah, they've managed to squeeze more out of that. I guess that's the only thing that's changed since I've been in this game for 15 years. Is when I started, we struggled to get to 50 degrees. Now 60's pretty easy, 70's coming. There are, I mean, I'm involved quite heavily with a unit. We call it the king of the heat pumps. It's made by Hitachi, and it's an ultra high temperature machine. It will give you 80 degrees C when it's snowing outside. Very expensive machine, but it's designed for and used a lot for literally pull out the oil boiler, drop it straight in place. Looks like an oil boiler, in it goes, and it was designed exactly for that job. It's a very niche product, only Hitachi make them. Amazing for that particular one job, but bizarrely probably cheaper to install than ripping all your radiators out.
Right, and they have to be sited in the open air.
So yeah, the outdoor unit has to. I mean, to give you an idea of how much air they move, the average house in the UK is about 120 meters squared. So you know those 3-bedroom semi-detached houses that are everywhere. They're 120 meters squared, so they have a volume of about 250 meters squared, meters cubed. A heat pump will move 100 meters cubed a minute, so it does the size of your house every 3 minutes.
That's already access to air then.
Yeah, you need a lot of air. Don't stick them in the garage and do not put them in the loft.
Right. And I don't know this one. This is just go back to my particular thing with the floors and the drafty subfloors. Is there do you know of a specialist company that can put foam into suspended floors?
What you're asking there is revolutionary revolutionary speak in this country.
Oh, is it?
If you even suggest that you could put cavity wall insulation into the floor, people will leap about and say the house will fall down within 15 minutes. Bizarrely, I know that America is hardly the place that you would look to for energy efficiency. But my brother lived in Texas 15 years ago, and that's what they do in Texas. They fill the floors with cavity wall insulation, and it transforms the building. But you cannot get anyone to do it here.
Because of the perceived damp problem.
Yes, I mean, it's nothing to do with damp. The only reason your house was ventilated underneath is because some idiot put a fireplace in the lounge and you needed to get the air to it.
Yeah.
But they will not go with this idea of filling the floors. I asked the same thing, and actually in my house I lagged all of the walls 2 feet thick in loft insulation. Made an enormous difference.
Oh, right.
But it would be easier in the States. They cut a 4-inch hole under the front door and just blow it in, and it works. It's amazing, but we're not allowed to do that here. Apparently the house will fall down.
All right.
Any more?
Graham, I've got a question, and thank you so far. It's been really, really useful and down to earth as well. So thank you. Well, yeah, your best is good. Thank you. We've got a few applications are starting to come in to the parish council, which are putting heat pumps in. And one of the advisories that we tend to give is just to for people to think about the impact of noise. Are there any strategies that people can do? Can one put what if you need to reduce the noise a bit, or you'd like to? Can you put a wall somewhere, or a roof, a lid, far up, or is there anything that works? Or
I always say, if you want to do that, please buy a Mitsubishi or something like it's nothing to do with me. You just can't escape from the fact that I have got to move vast quantities of air. So there are multiple types of heat pumps, but the two major ones are what we call the monoblocks, which is the ones I've shown you, which is the boiler that lives in the garden, tends to be very close to the house because you're taking your hot water out and back. But there are machines called splits. And what they do with a split is they cut the machine in half goes in the house, half goes down the garden. And if you're worried about noise, the best thing you can do is put a bit of distance between you or your neighbors and the heat pump. So split systems available from most of the manufacturers, they'll run 60, 70 meters down the garden. So yeah, by that distance, that's their trademark. That's what they're amazing at. So if you're worried about noise, when you're speaking to your contractor, say, look, I would like this thing to be 20 meters down the garden. They will all come back with the same thing, that say they're not very noisy. And you go, it's so subjective. And there's loads of idiots on YouTube showing here the birds singing, all that. You'll notice that none of those videos are taken when it's snowing and foggy and really cold. I mean, I can show you a video now of my unit running silent. It's not on, but it's silent. So if you're worried about the noise at all, it's your house, it's your money. Move the thing down the garden. Split systems are designed to be cheap to go down the garden. With monoblocks, it's very, very expensive. Allow £100 a meter to go down the garden. So I've put one once 45 meters down the garden, cost the guy $4.5 grand in pipe work to get it down there. He didn't care. He was no issue. So I get that completely, but enclosing the units, it just doesn't work.
Okay.
Could I just quickly follow up on
Thank
that,
you.
Graham? Sorry, just because it's right on that one. Could you just clarify there whether the split system is any better or worse performance than the monoblock?
No, essentially, they'll all tell you that, because unfortunately we're a bunch of shysters in this industry. We're like double glazing salesmen. Cutting the unit in half and moving bits around the garden doesn't make any difference to the efficiency. You do get a small loss in the pipework. So if you go 60 meters down the garden, there is a loss. If you push your supplier, they will produce you the data. There's a thing, every unit you can buy has a thing called a technical data book, and they are obliged to give this drop in information to you. They hate giving completely available. If you, I have seen it years ago. I had a customer who did a split system and they just threw the tubes in the ground and put soil over them. And when it snowed, you could actually see lines down the garden where the pipework was buried. That is what we would like to avoid.
Thank you very much.
No worries. Any more? My wife's cooking dinner and it smells fantastic. So,
Nice. Graham, thank you so much. I got a lot out of that. So yeah, Graham, thank you.
Yeah,
Very
thank you
good.
very much.
thank you.
Really
Thanks,
appreciate
Graham.
it.
Very good.
If anyone has got any questions, obviously you can find me on LinkedIn, or if you go to my website, there's an email address. If you want to send me some emails, I can at least do that. One of the things I would rest assured is, you know, in your part of the country, there are some really, really good installers who I really rate. So if you're, you know, if you want even that, just who would you use? Because you're Devon way, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
Where about, north or south Devon?
South.
South.
Okay, so there's I'm not very good at geography, but I have some really good installers in Torquay and Torbay and so on, and really, really nice people. There's quite a few out that way. So if you send me an email, I will send you their details. Trust me, they don't pay me anything or even send me Christmas presents. So maybe I should work on that. But no, have a great Christmas, everyone. Thank you for listening to me rabbiting on. No worries. Thanks a lot.
Have a good break, everyone.
See you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for organising.